Hello and welcome to the Rory O'Connor Podcast, podcast number 6, about national security cinema, documenting the involvement of US government, defense and intelligence agencies in Hollywood. Using the US Freedom of Information Act and journalistic and academic sources, and through analysis of script drafts, my guest Tom Secker and his co-author Matthew Alford have greatly increased our knowledge of the US Department of Defense's and the CIA's use of hardware and expertise as an enticement to film producers and directors to remove elements of their scripts critical of the defence and intelligence establishments, and to that extent affecting how cinema-goers see the world. Tom Secker is the co-author with Matthew Alford of National Security Cinema, whose subtitle, with equal parts attention-grabbing and seriousness, is The Shocking New Evidence of Government Control in Hollywood. It was published in 2017. Since 2010, Tom has been using the Freedom of Information Act to prize information from the Pentagon and the CIA, but from other agencies too, about their involvement in assisting the production of film and other screen entertainment. He publishes the documents released to him for all to read at his website spyculture.com, and his research has been featured in Salon and The Mirror, among a number of other outlets. At that website, spyculture.com, you can also find his excellent podcast, Clandestine, with an M. So, hey, Tom, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Rory. Thanks for having me on.
Good, glad to hear it. So I think we've known that the Pentagon in the past has had an involvement, say, in producing films, but through using the Freedom of Information Act, you've discovered a whole other scope to this. So could you give us some idea of what you've found?
Sure. Well, if you look at the sort of books and things that were out there before we wrote National Security Cinema, you probably would have thought that the Pentagon had been involved with a few hundred movies and a handful of TV shows. What we found is that it's at least 800 movies over the last century and well over 1,000 TV shows. In fact, their involvement in TV seems to have massively expanded since the turn of the century in the terms of, internet TV and digital and so on. There's so many more channels and so many more TV programs being made. And it seems that the Pentagon have kind of leapt in with both feet and got involved very much with that side of entertainment as well. So, it's enormous. When I say 1,000 TV shows, I'm talking about the individual titles. If we were counting episodes, like every episode of NCIS or Hawaii Five-0 that they support, it's probably several thousand. So there's a significant proportion, hours and hours every week of TV and movies that we're watching that have been in some way supported and influenced by the DoD.
What you've got through these requests have been notes from the office in these agencies, the CIA and the Pentagon, what they call entertainment liaison office, an entertainment liaison office. Each of these, they all have one. The Marines have one, the Air Force, CIA, and so on. Notes on their involvement in the production of the film. So, for example, script changes that they've requested and so on. Can you give us an idea on what those documents kind of say?
Well, specifically as regards script changes, we compiled the information in the book about what script changes the CIA and the Pentagon in particular requested on these various different products from lots of different sources. I should say some of this we have taken from newspaper and other media coverage. Some of this we found in National Archives. Some of this we've sort of drawn from earlier research. But we nonetheless found dozens of examples in reports from these entertainment liaison offices. And in some cases, we were able to get full copies of the script notes that they provided to these producers. And it involves everything. Settings, characters, dialogue, action, even sometimes the overall thematics and tone of these productions are being changed and being censored by the military and to some extent the CIA. The CIA has a smaller involvement in Hollywood, but obviously they're a smaller organization. The Pentagon is, the biggest organization in the world. So I mean, what sorts of things? If you look at a film like Rules of Engagement, say, the central character in that, played by Samuel L. Jackson, he was toned down. They felt he came across as too kind of crazy and wild, and he's a Marine Corps lieutenant, and basically his unit is flown into an embassy where there's a protest going on and everything goes to hell, and the Marines end up shooting crowds to pieces and killing dozens of people. And then there's not a trial, but a military tribunal looking into all of this. And that's essentially what the film is about. And there's one point when his defense lawyer is saying, well, we sent him in to do a really dirty job, so it's no surprise that something like this happened. Or something like that was how it was phrased in the original script. The Pentagon didn't like the phrase dirty job. They felt it made it sound like what he was doing was kind of a black operation or something. So they said, oh, no, change that to tough mission. Well, the political difference between a dirty job and a tough mission is quite significant. So, it shapes almost the whole perspective on what that course of events actually means and what we should think about it. That instead of looking at that and thinking, well, they did shoot a bunch of protesters, we're thinking, oh, well, it was a tough mission. So we should sympathize with him and we should see him as, innocent in this situation. Like, what choice did he have? Things like that. They don't like romantic relationships between currently serving people in the military. That's a consistent theme where every time a TV show or a film portrays two Marines having some kind of romantic liaison, it's like, oh, no, one of them has to be made a civilian character or someone else, or they just strip that part of the script out. It's all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and at the heart of this, there's a quid pro quo that basically that these script changes are happening in return for military hardware, other types of assistance like the use of military bases and so on. These are conducted through what are called production assistance agreements. Is there a kind of standard production assistance agreement that you could talk about?
Well, most of these we have several different copies of these, maybe a dozen by now, that we obtained through FOIA requests. And the contracts are mostly the same, but in essence, when you go to the Pentagon, when you want to access a military base or shoot on an aircraft carrier or borrow a bunch of tanks for a certain scene or whatever it is that you want, you go to them, you have to give them 5 copies of your script, which they then send around to various parts of the Pentagon who may have a vested interest in how they're being portrayed in the film. They compile a bunch of notes, they send them back to the producers, and they say, you have to change this, take this out, move this to here, whatever, if you want access to these things. Then, when they've done that and the script is approved, you have to sign these production assistance agreements which bind you to that version of the script. So you can't subsequently make a bunch of changes while you're in the middle of production without, once again, running it by the Pentagon. So they have a lot of control, to be honest. The Pentagon are in a very powerful position because they have assets that you can't get elsewhere. I mean, no one else has dozens of Air Force bases. No one else has hundreds and hundreds of fighter jets and ships and what have you. So it's not like Hollywood can just go elsewhere to get this stuff. I mean, if you just want a Humvee or something, maybe, you can go and rent one. But anything more elaborate than a few ground vehicles, and you have to go to the military. So they're in a position of being able to say no to people. And therefore, these contracts, they bind the producers very, very closely to what the Pentagon is demanding.
So there are plenty of films that wouldn't exist without the Department of Defense. For example, Top Gun, Transformers, and effectively the Department of Defense has a very early can have a very early influence on the script, as it did in Transformers, for example.
Yeah, I mean, with some of the Transformers films, they actually signed production assistance agreements. They signed the contracts with them before the script was even finished, because that's how confident they were that the finished script would end up meeting all of their criteria and demands. In some cases, the producers of these films are meeting with the Pentagon before they've even written the first draft, or at least before it's complete, so that they can, make sure there are no problems down the road. I mean, some of these producers are themselves very pro-Pentagon. Michael Bay, in particular, he loves the military. So he's perfectly happy to go along with anything they ask. So if they want to insert a bit of dialogue here, or like in the second film, they changed the tone of the scene when their coffins are with dead soldiers in, are being kind of removed from the back of a plane that's flown them back from wherever they died. And when they first wrote that, Phil Strubb, the DoD's entertainment liaison, looked at it and he said, "Oh, no, I don't like the tone of this. It doesn't seem respectful enough." So that scene was changed to be in keeping with what the Pentagon demanded. And Michael Bay obviously not only had no problem with this, he actually wanted to do this, because he was going to them at a very early stage, saying, "We're making another Transformers movie, so this is what we've got in mind. What can you do for us? Well, what do you want us to do, even?" So, yeah. I mean, some of these are not written by the Pentagon as such, but you could argue they deserve a co-writing credit.
Tell us a bit more about Phil Strubb. For he in that Transformers film you mentioned, he does seem to have been on set and suggesting lines. Maybe I've got this wrong, but he was introducing lines on set when he wasn't happy with the way it had been going.
Yeah, there's a scene, if you watch the first Transformers movie, there's a scene when a bunch of soldiers are out in the desert and they're attacked by this sort of, I don't know, sort of like a snake-like transformer that's sort of burying itself in the sand and leaking out sand and what have you at them. And they call in an airstrike to protect themselves and defeat it. And then at the end of the battle, the tone of the Secretary of Defense, played by John Boyd, they felt the tone of this wasn't quite right, that he seemed to be a bit sort of gruff and just like, get those guys the hell out of there, rather than concerned for them and, concerned for their well-being or what have you. So Phil Strubb inserted the line, "Bring 'em home." Now, given that the Pentagon doesn't have a particularly good track record when it comes to bringing soldiers home, and it tends to keep them in places far, far longer than they ever should need to be there, that line, one little line that kind of shifts the end of the tone of that scene, is quite deceptive. I know it's a Transformers movie, but nonetheless, they're portraying real soldiers, and it applies just the same in the real world. So, yeah, this is a line that Phil Strubb came up with on set, and that if you watch the film, it's there in the film, And once more, it's sort of, you got to compare it to real-life military policy, because supposedly this is all about making the portrayal of the military more accurate, that they're mostly concerned with educating the public about what it is the military really does and how they really think about things. But that's actually a classic piece of deception. That one line is a misrepresentation of everything the US military has done in the last 100 years. So, yeah.
So, do you detect any other, say, ideological propositions that basically these entertainment liaison officers are trying to insert into films?
Generally speaking, it's not a case of them trying to put things into films. It's a case of them changing the things in films that they don't like. Because by now, they're benefiting from the fact that the military has had some kind of involvement in Hollywood for 100 years, over 100 years. So Hollywood is already primed, if you like, to make relatively pro-war, relatively pro-military movies. But they still put things in there that the Pentagon don't like. So there still has to be a bit of censorship and a bit of changing things that the Pentagon finds objectionable. Another one is military suicide. This comes up repeatedly. Any film that contains a reference to military suicide either has the scenario explaining why the person commits suicide changed, so it's not a direct result of their military career or anything like that, or they just take out that element of the script. This is this is an issue they're obviously quite sensitive about, and understandably so, because a lot of currently serving and formerly serving US military people, not just US, kill themselves. The suicide rates are surprisingly high. So you've got to wonder, not just from a compassionate, humanistic point of view, but from a PR point of view, that kind of suicide rate is a big problem for the Pentagon, because it kind of reveals that this whole mission that they're so proud of is actually seen by quite a lot of their own people as so futile and horrifying that they end up killing themselves. So that's a facet, a consequence, if you like, of this, that they want to brush under the carpet, that they don't want to draw attention to, and that they certainly don't want to see in entertainment productions. So that's, I mean, there are several.
And that's of a piece with another goal of their involvement, which is retention and recruitment and retention of soldiery.
I'm sure that's the excuse they use for that one, because they have an instruction, a piece of DoD doctrine that governs how they work with the entertainment industry. And the two factors that they're supposed to consider when deciding whether to support something or not is, will this accurately inform the public, and will this help with recruitment and retention programs? Even Strub himself admits that's astonishingly broad. That's so broad you could drive a train through it. So what that in fact becomes is anything that the Pentagon doesn't like, they say, oh, this might damage recruitment and retention programs, therefore we strip it out. And yeah, of course, the portrait of military suicide is not going to encourage people to either sign up for or stay in the military. So they're not wrong about that. But I do think there are other PR and propaganda reasons why they don't like that storyline element as well.
Yeah, there are no guidelines for what you for how to get the DoD's cooperation. And there are outs. There are a number of outs they can use, like that recruitment and retention as an out to drop involvement with the film, for example.
Well, or to threaten them into making the changes that they want. So, yeah.
Yeah. Apart from that, you've pointed to a couple of to empirical studies about the effects of films which promote the military, basically. For example, about Argo and Zero Dark Thirty. Well, sorry, these are CIA films, but they do have a positive effect on people's view of the government.
Yeah. There was this, I can't remember exactly what the study was called. It was an academic study where they essentially sat a bunch of audiences down, gave them questionnaires, I guess, where they explained their political views and what they thought of different institutions and so on. Then they watched these films, Argo and Zero Dark 30, and then they polled them again to see how their attitudes changed as a result of watching the films. Because in a long-term, mass-scale sense, it's impossible to isolate cinema among all the other factors that are affecting people's views of things. So the only way you can really test it at all is short-term, like this. But what they found was quite extraordinary, because even institutions that weren't depicted in the films were viewed better by the audiences after watching the films. So, for example, the State Department does not appear in Zero Dark 30, yet people thought better of them after watching the film than they did before watching the film. When it came to more general and abstract questions, like whether the government in general was doing a good job or whether the country was headed in the right direction, again, substantial numbers, 20, 25, 30% of people felt better about those sorts of questions after watching one film about one set of events that may not even be true, than they did before watching it. So it seems that these films do actually have quite a profound impact on up to a quarter, maybe even a third of the population. And that's enough to change elections. That's enough to be able to start wars that you otherwise wouldn't be able to start. It's all sorts of things. So I think it's really important. I think this is the most under-recognized propaganda operation on Earth.
Actually, one thing, if I'm to play devil advocate, it'd be somebody might say, well, look, how central is this to the propagandistic intent, or to making possible foreign policy, for example? How much does it matter, really? What would your response be?
My response would be, go on the C-SPAN website, type in things like James Bond, Jason Bourne, Tom Clancy, and see how often these things are referenced in congressional inquiries and committees. It's all the time. Even the politicians are influenced by this, let alone the public. So, yeah, that would be my first way of demonstrating to them just how kind of important this is. Another way would simply be to note how many times in the next month people refer to films and TV when talking about politics, rather than referring to news items or, facts. It's people's kind of, for all those things that people don't understand, because both people who don't work in government, which is most people, don't really understand how government institutions work. So these TV shows and films fill in that gap for them. And so that actually has quite a profound impact on framing how they see all of this.
One of the things that I've had to think about a while recently is I saw Eye in the Sky. I saw it again, as it were, and I actually liked it the first time. I guess. I did like it the first time, and actually I didn't like it the second time, and it was because, I think you mentioned in the notes of the book that basically that it has a kind of a patina of being critical, or kind of at least at an angle about drone strikes, and it's a very contrived situation when you think about it. Most drone strikes don't happen when somebody's just about to strap on a bomb and go down to a supermarket. And you do point out a lot that there are lots of films that do have a kind of patina of being critical, but aren't really. And that this is another way that they've kind of insinuated themselves into things.
Yes, there is. I'm not sure whether that one was actually military supported, but in any case, there is that would be one of those things that is heavily reinforced through this means, because you're never going to get it on the news where, breaking news, some suicide bomber is on his way to wherever, downtown New York, so we brought in a drone to take him out. That you never can see that on the news. You will only see it 3 hours after it's happened, once the whole thing has been cleared through airport PR and communications and so on anyway.
Sure.
So the notion of that, ticking clock scenario, that desperate, we have to do something, we have to do it now, that is almost entirely reinforced by entertainment. Because in the real world, it doesn't happen very often, if at all. Frankly, the genuine terrorist attacks that happen, I get the impression the intelligence services don't know anything about them. The ones they completely fail to stop are because they haven't got a clue. There is just some, random group of nutcases who happen to do something violent. And in some instances, there's not an awful lot you can do to stop that. So, whatever. But this notion of, we have to torture this person because we think there's going to be a dirty bomb going off in Washington, D.C. in 3 hours. When did that actually happen? Because I've studied the history of this war on terror and previous wars on terror as well. And I can't actually think of a single example where the intelligence services knew that an attack was imminent and had to use torture in order to stop it, or a drone strike, or any of these, extreme measures. Yet people believe, people believe that. They believe that logic. They believe that rationale. And the only reason is because of entertainment.
So actually the most famous example of this is Zero Dark 30, where the CIA seems to have had pretty big involvement. And one question I want to ask you, first of all, was in this situation, the CIA involvement became pretty well known. And there was, I think there were lawsuits by a conservative kind of watchdog called Judicial Watch, and there was follow-up by newspapers. Can I ask you, is the scope of what they got, because they're well financed, is it more than you've been generally able to get, or is it the same stuff? And in that sense, could anybody have done it?
No. The only way that Judicial Watch and other people managed to get these documents out of the CIA was by filing FOIA lawsuits, which is an expensive and difficult process unless you're lucky enough to find a lawyer who's willing to do it pro bono. So, that's the only case in history, to be honest, where a relatively full set of records is now available to the public. In terms of the CIA, they presumably have or had dozens, if not hundreds of pages of internal communications and so on relating to all of this, just as they did with Zero Dark 30. For example, Argo filmed Langley. Yet, when I asked them, and other people asked them for records on Argo, they said they couldn't find anything. So they let a film crew in to wander around their headquarters, and they don't have a single piece of paper about this? That suggests to me they're either astonishingly careless, or they're destroying their own records so that no one can ask for them. And as such, that leaves 0 Dark 30 as the one that we, like I say, we have several hundred pages of stuff on, but nothing even close to that for other films.
Yeah, and what happened in 0 Dark 30 is pretty instructive, the CIA's involvement in it, because most famously, Osama bin Laden's eventual apprehension and killing, it's begun through the way of getting him is through the torture of an associate.
Well, this is a tricky part, because after the film came out, the CIA distanced themselves from it, and even the director of the CIA, temporary standing director at the time, or acting director, as they call it, which, if you think about it, is a curious term when talking about movies. But anyway, he issued a statement saying, oh, no, we want to repudiate this notion that torture is what led us to bin Laden and led us to find him in Abbottabad. And that the CIA weren't in any way trying to enforce that narrative at all. But yet, we know that a group of not public relations officers, but CIA operations people, black ops people, had several conference calls with Mark Bold, where he essentially read the script out to them, and then they gave him notes over the phone, explaining what they wanted changing and removing. And the only thing that bothered them about the torture sequences was that they didn't want dogs to be used so prominently, and they didn't want the central character Maya, the redhead female CIA agent, to be directly physically involved in doing the torture. But aside from that, they seem to have no problem with it. So we're left with a contradiction between what CIA Black Ops thinks and what the CIA Directorate and PR people think about that film. Make of that what you will, I guess.
And as I recall, the person on whom that character Maya is based did have a central role in torture.
Well, she's known as the Queen of Torture, so yes.
Yeah.
That's Alfredo. Well, I mean, she was based on several people, but one of them is Alfredo Francis Bukowski, who, was nicknamed the Queen of Torture.
Yeah, so more broadly, the CIA involvement, it does seem to have a different kind of nature, because they don't have much hardware to give. Nope. What do they offer to a filmmaker?
Well, that's something I don't quite understand. I mean, I get it if you're trying to actually get access to the CIA campus and film the headquarters, but aside from that, I can only imagine what they have to offer is a lot of good stories. If you're trying to write a spy movie now, after spy movies have existed for 60, 70, 80 years or something, most of the good ideas have already been done. So who can you go to get something a bit unusual, something people haven't seen before? Or at least a story element, a plot line that someone hasn't seen, that people haven't seen before? Well, you can go to the CIA, because they've got all sorts of stuff. Like the Argo story. I mean, whatever you think of that film, it's a good story. It's a fun tale.
I should say that's about, I haven't actually seen it, but that's about the rescue of hostages from Iran in 1979, or the attempt, am I right?
Yeah. I mean, the successful operation to smuggle several, they weren't hostages, they were people who had escaped from the embassy during the rioting and were holed up in Tehran and didn't know how to get out. So they sent in some people to exfiltrate them. And the cover that they created was to set up a Hollywood film company, pretend they were making a science fiction movie, and pretend that all of these people were part of the production crew. And that's how they got them out. Which is quite a good story. As far as spy stories go, it's certainly worth making into a movie. So it's that sort of thing. That's what the CIA has, I think.
Is it Paul Barry or Paul Berry? Paul Barry, am I wrong? Who's the entertainment liaison officer currently for the CIA?
No.
Says that
he was only there for a couple of years from after Chase Brandon. He was there 2008, 2009. I'm not actually sure who the current one is. The most recent one that I know of was a woman called Kelly Caldwell, but she left the job last year. So actually, I don't know who the current one is.
But Paul Barry said that the added value we provide is at a story's inception, and that they spend many hours pitching ideas to filmmakers. Just
well, that's what he said about Chase Brandon. I'm not sure quite whether the operation of the CIA's liaison office has been quite the same since Chase Brandon left in early 2007, I think it was. But nonetheless, you have to assume that they do still try to pitch ideas to producers and at least inveigle their way into the story writing process, because, like he says, that's what they have on offer, is lots of interesting, weird stuff that we don't know about because we're not part of the CIA, that they can fictionalize and find a way to slide into a movie or a TV show. And that's actually, in some ways, worth more than the hardware, because that's the truly original thing about your film or your TV program.
But again, there's a price, and I actually I enjoyed Charlie Wilson's War. It's a good fun film, but it's kind of appalling how much they managed to change it. Basically, talk about that if you could.
Okay, well, I mean, we never got any documentation on Charlie Wilson's War, but we extrapolated by reading 2 draft scripts and comparing them to the finished film to establish where did this film start and where did it end up, and therefore likely what did the CIA change or remove from the film. So it tells the story.
And it's worth saying that Chase Brandon really was a technical advisor on it. So
yeah, he definitely was. Yeah, the CIA definitely consulted on this film. We know that much. So, like I say, we compared these draft scripts and the final movie, and it's things like, in the original script, there are references to Al Qaeda and overt references to Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and the CIA support for Hekmatyar and related groups around him like Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, people like that. Now, Hekmatyar was a narco-trafficking sociopath who actually spent most of his time in the Soviet-Afghan war fighting with other Mujahideen factions who he didn't think were quite extremist enough, rather than actually fighting the Soviets. Nonetheless, he got the largest proportion of CIA aid of anyone. He's actually the basis for he is the subject of the documentary that what's her name? The Texan lady who gets Charlie Wilson involved in this.
Herring. Joanne Herring.
Joanne Herring, yeah. Near the start of the film, she actually invites him to her house in Texas and shows him this documentary that she's helped to make. That documentary is about Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
Yeah.
You'd never realise that if you watch the finished film, because every reference to Hekmatyar was excised from the script. And every reference to CIA support for him was excised from the script. So it's stuff like that. We don't know whether this was necessarily the CIA's involvement, but again, in the original story, the film ends with Charlie Wilson sat in his office as the Pentagon is hit by a plane on 9/11, very much suggesting this is the consequences of the CIA's Operation Cyclone, the support for the Mujahideen. Now, that's quite a powerful ending, certainly a quite critical ending, doesn't appear in the film. Yeah. Instead, we get some sort of vague touch about, we did something amazing, and then we screwed up the end game. That just sort of makes it sound like, we meant well, but maybe something went a bit wrong.
We just totally forgot about Afghanistan after that.
yeah, which isn't actually true. So, there's all sorts. Yeah, I mean, I can only encourage people to read that section of the book, because that was one of the case studies that we felt was quite strong, that we identified what was likely the CIA influence on that film, and it seems to have been quite considerable.
Who is Lawrence Seward? Tell me about him.
He's an academic who maintained, we should say, a significant archive of materials from the DoD's film office. So this would be annotated scripts, communications with filmmakers and producers, all sorts of stuff. Going from 1950s through to the late 1990s. So covering a significant chunk of the DoD's time in Hollywood. He has not allowed anyone any access to that archive since David Robb in 2003-2004, an investigative journalist who wrote the seminal book Operation Hollywood, which in some ways was the first real chink in the armor, the first real kind of breakthrough in this line of research. So since then, Seward, despite not publishing any more books himself, not since 2005 anyway, has denied anyone else access to it, saying he hasn't finished his research on it, he wants to publish again on it himself. And as a result, this information isn't available to the public. It does seem, as far as we can tell, that archive has now been made publicly available, and my co-author Matt is planning a trip there in the coming months so that we can mine it for information for the second edition of the book.
Very good. I think you have another potential source of information about actual script changes to scripts as well.
Yeah, I mean, we are planning more FOIA requests, and we do have some more information that's landed since we published the first edition, or so far the only edition, in as much as more documents have come in from both the Army and the Navy, and I have currently about 60, maybe 70 FOIA requests outstanding on this topic. So anything that comes in the next 8 to 10 months, we will try and fold into the second edition of the book anyway. So yeah, I mean, there's also a big Marine Corps archive that runs to hundreds of thousands of pages, some of which won't be at all relevant, but I'm just giving you a sense of how big it is. And I am trying to get the money together to get them to search through all of that and provide me with all of the information they have on script content. So all of the script notes, all of the emails and letters to producers about the scripts, all of that stuff. So hopefully that will also yield considerable new information that's never been published before. And naturally, all of these documents get stuck up on my site and are freely available to anyone who wants to take a look.
One of the dynamics that you have picked out in the way the DoD changes films is they're actually quite self-effacing. It's called civilianization, removing themselves from the scripts. And that happened in a number of films like GoldenEye, Jurassic Park and Contact. What's happening there, really?
Well, it's where, and there's an aspect of the script that they don't like, whether it's dialogue, action, doesn't really matter. It can even be a location where something happens, like a laboratory, like in the Hulk. The laboratory where the Hulk is accidentally created in the original script is a military lab, so they changed it to a civilian facility. Things like that. Basically, it's where there's something in the script that you can't just remove. You know, you can't just remove the laboratory that accidentally creates the Hulk, can you? Because it's a vital part of the storyline. So you can't just check it out. So you civilianize it. You distance the DoD from it. And as a result, you're distancing the DoD from problematic aspects of the script. Not just that they see as problematic, but that the public should see as problematic. So as a result of that, films that have been supported by the DoD systematically blame problems not on the military, but on essentially everyone else. So all of the origins and causes of these problems in the films that then have to be resolved by the protagonists and so on are the result of civilian actions, private corporations, rich people, whatever, some idiot who just does something, but never the military. It's never because the military did something stupid or corrupt or criminal. It's always that someone outside of the military did it. So therefore, they come away always appearing as the heroes, or at least in support of the heroes. And that's, from a propagandistic point of view, quite substantial. If you're thinking that this has been applied to dozens and dozens of movies and probably dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of TV shows. So yeah, it's an interesting tactic. It's one that we didn't realize until we started delving into this in a lot of detail.
One of the funniest examples of this is it Godzilla, where I think it was Philip Strubb said you're not having Air Force planes shoot at Godzilla because
no, that's Jurassic Park 3. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Where the original script had a scene where like Air Force gun planes, like heavy armored planes, were in like a dogfight in the air with pterodactyls, something like that. And Strubb said, no, that they would just tear those creatures apart. You're just going to end up making people hate the military and feel sorry for the pterodactyls. It's like it wouldn't be a fair fight. And this is something, again, that, I mean, that's an absurd example, but okay. nonetheless, this is something that comes up quite a lot, that they want the military to be seen as very competent, as, not someone to be messed with. They're very capable of killing people or killing things if they have to. But nonetheless, they don't want them to seem brutish or bullyish or like an overwhelming force. In fact, most of the films that they support these days that are actually like war films aren't large-scale ones. They're ones where a small group of special forces are ideally up against a much larger enemy. So if you think there's this film 12 Strong that's just come out, or Lone Survivor, Tim Phillips, it's all a very small group of men, all men, up against a much bigger, sort of more threatening enemy, almost as though the odds are against the DoD, which, just to re-emphasize, is the largest organization in the world. So, yeah, they want to seem competent and threatening, but not like they're just wiping the floor with people, or in this case, dinosaurs.
Yeah, and the CIA counterpart of that seems to be you need a female sympathetic CIA officer.
Ideally,
for example.
Yes.
So yeah, Carrie Matheson in Homeland, or Maya in Zero Dark 30. She breaks down at the end, crying.
Or the central character in Alias, or the central character in Covert Affairs, or take your pick. Really, these days, female CIA officers seem to be almost like an obligation. If you're going to make a CIA series these days, you have to have a female spy be one of the central characters. I have no issue with that. It's interesting to observe from a cultural point of view that when it comes to the DoD, it's almost always a bunch of, roughly shaved special forces soldiers. When it's the CIA, it's usually some grey pants suited Carrie Matheson clone.
And actually, that desire on the part of the Department of Defense to become kind of benevolently paternalistic comes out in its involvement in a whole panoply of stuff like American Idol, X Factor. It seems like they're just being a kind of provider of services, helping struggling businesses come along.
Yes, those struggling.
It also involved in
Hollywood
Oprah Winfrey show.
Yeah.
Oprah Winfrey shows, America's Got Talent, and so on.
Yeah, it's like I say, almost all parts of the entertainment culture are now in some way influenced by this process. Whether it's talk shows, reality TV, game shows, sports broadcasts, documentaries, movies, video games, dramas, comedies. When you go through these entertainment liaison office reports, some weeks they're working on 50, 60 different projects at varying stages of completion. This is a big, broad thing that they're doing. And perhaps the most important part of this, to my mind, or one of them anyway, is that according to their own instructions and doctrine, they're supposed to sit there waiting for requests for support to come in. And when Phil Strubb gives interviews, that's how he presents it. Oh, we're just a small office, and sometimes Hollywood producers turn up and say they'd like to film on a battleship, so we have to look at their script and blah, blah, blah. Whereas in reality, they're out there pitching ideas to studio executives, doing all kinds of little outreach programs, and even attending retirement parties for studio executives, anything they can to inveigle their way in at the upper echelons of Hollywood and gain more influence and, make friends. So that the way that they present the entertainment liaison offices themselves is extremely duplicitous. It's not just that they're deceiving us through films about the Pentagon in general, they're deceiving us about their own role in these films, which, to my mind, suggests they know they're up to something that's pretty dodgy. At the very least, surely this constitutes domestic propaganda, and I'm pretty sure the DoD aren't allowed to do domestic propaganda. So, yeah, it's a problem. It is a problematic issue.
As I recall, the CIA as well, you make a very strong case that the CIA was involved pretty much from the inception in Wag the Dog, which is the film about a fake war, a synthetic war in Albania, which is designed to increase the president's popularity or get him through a bump in his popularity.
Yeah, I mean, the president in this film is... he is accused of sexual misconduct shortly before an election, so they need a distraction. They call in this spin doctor, a guy who appears to be a spin doctor. His great idea is we fake a war, which is quite ambitious, really. And yeah, we make the argument in the book. Again, we don't have any documentation proving this, and indeed, even Chase Brandon's own website never said anything about Wag the Dog. But nonetheless, you look at the parallels between that character played by Robert De Niro, Conrad Breen, and you look at Chase Brandon, and you think he's clearly based on Chase Brandon. It's plain as day. He looks like him, he talks like him, he does essentially the same job throughout the film. People keep asking him, who do you really work for, and what are you really? Who are you? And he never answers, just like a CIA agent would. They would never say, "Oh, I'm a spy for the CIA. I'm here to manipulate the public opinion." But that's nonetheless what he's doing, and that's what Chase Brandon did for a decade or so. So I think either formally or informally, officially or unofficially, Chase Brandon was involved in the early stages of that film, and that they based that Robert De Niro character on him. It doesn't help that Robert De Niro then went on to make 3 different movies with Chase Brandon, which kind of makes the argument a bit stronger. So, yeah. You could even argue Robert De Niro has played Chase Brandon multiple times on the screen.
What else was he in?
Meet the Parents and Meet the Fockers spring to mind. They were both Chase Brandon-supported films. And you look at the retired CIA agent and some of the way he dresses in those films, and you think, he resembles Chase Brandon a bit in those too. So, yeah.
You make a number of recommendations about how the Department of Defense and the CIA should be straight up in its involvement in cinema. What are those recommendations?
Well, one of them would be to have a credit at the start of the film rather than right at the very end, buried after 3/4 of the people have left the cinema anyway, or turned the DVD off, saying this film was supported by whichever government agencies supported it. It's sometimes more than one. I think that would at least give the audiences a half a chance to look at the film that they then watched with a slightly more critical eyes to its propagandistic value. Because we're not in this to try and ruin people's enjoyment of movies. Movies are great. If we didn't love movies, Matt and I wouldn't have written this book. So it's not about that. It's about, go to movie, enjoy it where it's entertainment value by all means. But, still have half an eye on the propagandistic elements. That's what we'd like movie-going audiences to do. So make it fair on them. Like you say, you stick a credit up at the front of the movie. Also, I think they should just publish all of these documents. None of them are actually classified. They're not, top secret or anything. Nonetheless, the only way to get them is to file endless freedom of information requests. And even then, quite often you can't get the things you're looking for. So just like the MPAA gives classifications on movies relating to usually its sexual and violent content, so that audiences know, at least to some extent, what they're in for when they go and see a film, I think the same should be true politically. And therefore, the state influence on film should be public knowledge, so that people can choose whether they want to go and see that film or not from an informed point of view.
So films should be rated DOD or CIA.
Or at least they should just publish all of the script information up on their website, so that before someone goes to see a movie, if they care, they can go and check, this is what was changed and removed from this movie by the DOD.
Actually, finally, you are doing something pretty different here, because generally speaking, people are very slow to acknowledge the influence of these agencies in film. So, could you talk about the fact that you might be seen from an academic point of view and taking some risks, but I guess you'd see them as worthwhile risks?
Yes. Well, I mean, I don't know if I even see it in those terms, because I simply want to know. I want to be able to know what they're doing, and I want to be able to publish it and make it publicly accessible. That's what I'm motivated by primarily, in its sort of most functional sense. I don't really care about the rest of it because this is true. That's what matters here. I'm not making anything up. I'm not exaggerating anything. I'm obtaining government records and publishing them and publishing stuff on them. And rather than the whole conversation about this tends to fall into two camps. You've got people who either don't know it's going on or pretend it's irrelevant and doesn't really matter and who cares if the Pentagon has some script input. And you've got people who think there are secret nefarious forces behind every single movie out there, and every single last moment of every movie is somehow propagandizing them. Matt and I sit somewhere in the middle. We're saying the conspiracy theorists are half right. There is a big state-sponsored propaganda operation at work here. We're certainly not denying that. Bigger than most journalists or academics or anyone else has previously realized or would care to admit. On the other side, there's plenty of stuff that Hollywood produces that's propaganda of a different kind that has nothing to do with the government. So we're just trying to take a more mature and accurate approach to this whole subject and to kind of open source it. Stick all this information up online and then people can actually look at it for themselves. They don't even have to listen to us. So, yeah. Although hopefully they will.
Okay, so what are you planning over the next while?
I'm working on a film for those. I don't know if you know about this. I made a couple of documentaries back in the day about the 7/7 bombings that some people will be familiar with. I'm doing something quite different with this one, but I'm just saying, I'm kind of returning to a bit of filmmaking. We are planning a second edition, but that probably won't be until the middle of next year that will be out, because we want it to expand considerably and be a different book to the one we've already written, and that requires doing a bunch of fresh research and analysis. So yeah, plenty of FOIA requests still going in, plenty of stuff coming back that we're going to fold into all of that. And I guess that's mostly what we're up to, what I'm up to at the moment.
Tell us about the film.
It's not really a documentary. It's more like a philosophical essay, but in film or digital video format. And it's essentially about how these entertainment liaison offices are, whether consciously or otherwise, being used to try and not just pursue certain PR and propaganda objectives, but also to try and reassert the authority of the state, which is something that in recent years has very much been... there are a lot more people who are skeptical about their governments, let's say. That's a growing phenomenon. And so, therefore, it's a problem for governments. It's something they need to do something about. So I'm looking in particular at these cinematic universes, particularly the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but some of the others as well, and how these liaison offices have influenced those productions in a way that is about reasserting the authority both of the government and of a kind of general consensus, societal consensus about things. Because that is also something that we seem to lack right now. Everyone's arguing with each other. No one, everyone belongs to some small pocket. There's no sort of general agreement really about anything, I feel. So I also believe these liaison offices are being used to try and re-establish that sort of a consensus. And ultimately, the film will be about why I think this isn't going to work. It's not going to work out for them. I could be wrong about that prediction, but yeah, that's what the film is.
I was thinking about this, and I was one of the things that struck me is that I know you've got a kind of maybe grudging interest in Slavoj Žižek, but the only thing I think really that stuck with me from him is that you only need to kind of half believe something, that to nevertheless be in its thrall, that you can have a kind of ironic attitude, say, towards the state, but if you say, for example, only if you nonetheless really want the Russiagate investigation to be wholly successful, that's all you need. Then you're still in the pot, as it were. And I think that's the kind of, when you talk about re-establishing the authority of the state, people will have a kind of ironic attitude. But if they believe a bit of it, that's all that's needed. So there you go. That's my 2 cents.
Well, I guess we'll find out when we see how people respond to the movie.
Yeah.
Which at this point, I have no clue what people are going to make of this, because it's not something that I've ever tried to do before. So hopefully people will get something out of it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for your time. Yeah. Good to talk to you, Tom. I think that's it. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of done.
Take care now, man.
All the best.
Cheers.
You'll find links to web pages about the films referred to in this podcast and to Tom Secker's material on spy culture in the show notes on my website, roryo'connorjournalist.com. And I just want to say a quick and very sincere thank you to my new patrons on Patreon, Eamon O'Callaghan and Art Malone. Thank you both very much. Goodbye.